How the Brooklyn Nets were not only able to avoid disaster, but also put themselves in a pretty good situation. After having all the talent in the world, but failing in the playoffs in consecutive seasons, it seemed like the Brooklyn Nets were a dumpster fire. It seemed like all three of their stars just didn't want to be in Brooklyn anymore, and it seemed like the Nets were just in a terrible situation. But when you look at the Nets roster at this point, not only were they able to get out of that terrible situation, but at this point I actually think they have a really nice, talented young roster that has a ton of potential in the future as well. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Originally, when the Brooklyn Nets were able to acquire both Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the free agency, the Nets were seen as not only instant championship contenders, but they were seen as a very healthy organization, and an organization that would be very attractive to other star players or other free agents that would potentially want to go to Brooklyn. And especially after the season following, the Brooklyn Nets were able to acquire James Harden via trade to form a big three of three legitimate superstars in Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. The Nets were seen as instant championship favorites, and it was very hard to see any other team in the NBA really beating these guys if they were healthy. But unfortunately, staying healthy proved to be a very difficult thing for this big three, as the big three only played together in a handful of games during the regular season, and although they weren't playing all that much together, when they did play together, they looked unstoppable. Originally, when the big three were coming together, there actually were some questions and concerns of how well they would play together on the court, just due to the fact that all three of those guys needed the ball in their hands to be effective. But in that limited sample size that we did see of those guys playing together, it was pretty clear that they played very well, and they had a great chemistry together, just due to the fact that they were moving the ball freely, and it just seemed like they were all getting wide open shots out there. And when you have three guys who were the caliber of offensive players that Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving were, and they were also moving the ball very effectively and hitting their shots very effectively like they normally do, it just became almost impossible to stop these guys. And when they played together in that limited sample size, that's exactly what they were showing. So due to that, going into that year's playoffs, although the Nets didn't necessarily play all that much together, there still was a lot of hype and excitement around this team, and they still were seen as championship favorites. But unfortunately for them, during that year's playoffs, some of their guys ended up going down with injury, and they ended up losing in the second round to the Milwaukee Bucks in 7 games. And unfortunately for Brooklyn, it just seemed like after that loss, everything started to go downhill very quickly. As soon after that, James Harden ended up requesting a trade out of Brooklyn, and the Nets granted it and moved him to the Philadelphia 76ers, and in that deal they ended up getting significantly less than they originally moved for James Harden when they acquired him, so that ended up being a failed experiment for Brooklyn. Then after that, Kyrie Irving wasn't able to stay on the court the following season due to some rule changes, and not even a full season after having all the talent in the world and three of the best superstars in the NBA in Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, the Nets only had one of those three stars in Kevin Durant, and the guys they had alongside him just weren't nearly as talented of a team as they had previous. And at that point, things started to look pretty grim for the Brooklyn Nets, but it only got worse after that. As shortly after, Kyrie Irving ended up wanting out of Brooklyn, and the Nets ended up trading him to the Dallas Mavericks, and they didn't necessarily acquire all that much in return for him. And shortly after that, their main star in Kevin Durant ended up requesting for a trade, and a little bit after that, the Nets ended up granting it and moved him as well. But I will say in that deal, they ended up getting a ton in return for KD. But after moving on from all three of their stars, they went from a team that was a championship favorite and had all the talent in the world to a team that just traded away three superstars in a very short time frame. So a question that some of you may be asking at this point is, why do I think the Nets are actually in a pretty good situation at this point? Well, the first and main reason for why I feel this way is due to the overall young talent they have on the roster. When you look at this Nets team, they have guys like Mikal Bridges, who's been phenomenal phenomenal ever since he got to Brooklyn. I don't necessarily think people realized how good this guy truly was when he was with the Phoenix Suns, but it was pretty clear that they weren't utilizing him as well as they should have, and with the Brooklyn Nets, he's looking like an absolute star. But even besides him, they have Cam Thomas, who's a guy who I actually do like his future a ton. Cam Johnson has been really good at spreading the court out pretty effectively, but also showing a little bit more than that as well. They have guys like Nick Claxton, who I like his future. Royce O'Neal is a pretty good 3-and-D type player. They brought in some decent prospects during the draft, and they even have guys like Spencer Dinwiddie and Ben Simmons, who are both guys who are really talented, but in my opinion, at least for Spencer Dinwiddie, I don't necessarily think he's a winning player out there. I think he has all the talent in the world and is a great individual offensive talent, but I don't think he plays winning basketball. And for Ben Simmons, although he was so talented in the past, over the past 2 or 3 seasons, he's just been so poor for the Sixers and also the Brooklyn Nets that I'm not necessarily counting him to be one of their better players, although I will say at the same time, he was at a point extremely talented and one of the better younger players in the NBA, so I still think he has the talent within him. I just think he completely lost all his confidence. But with this younger roster the Nets do have and the lower expectations, maybe Ben could eventually regain that confidence and play a little bit better as time does progress. As of course, I do still think he has that talent, and it all comes down to confidence with Ben Simmons. But overall, just when you look at this roster up and down, it's pretty clear they have a ton of talented young players on the roster that are probably only going to get better with time, alongside with the draft picks they do have going forward. Now, the next reason for why I think the Nets are actually in a pretty good situation has to be due to their overall organization. Now, when you talk about the Brooklyn Nets organization historically, they're an organization who's known for making mistakes. It was a mistake when they traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett back in the day. You can even make the argument that it was a mistake bringing in Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden not too long ago, but at the end of the day, I do think the people that the Nets currently have in their front office do understand what they're doing, and do understand that they have a pretty young roster that is going to take some time to mature and grow, and I think they're going to do the right thing in bringing in some nice veterans to complement these younger guys they have, while also bringing in some nice players via the draft and eventually building that way. So at the end of the day, I do think the actual people you have in your organization is a huge factor on whether or not your organization is successful or not. You can have the most talented roster in the world, but if you have guys in the front office that don't necessarily know what they're doing, I do still think you can mess something up like that. But with this Brooklyn Nets team, I think they have a really promising young roster, but they also have guys in their front office that know what they're doing. So I do actually have a ton of confidence in the direction that the Nets would be going in the long-term future, alongside with their short-term future as well. So overall, although the Nets were actually in a pretty bad situation not too long ago, where all 3 of their stars ended up wanting out, at this point, I do think the Nets were able to do a really nice job at pivoting off that superstar trio that they did have and bring in a ton of draft picks alongside with young players to put forward a pretty talented young roster that not only is pretty good right away, but also has a ton of potential in the long-term future as well. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with this Brooklyn Nets team. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Nets have positioned themselves pretty well, not only in the short term, but also the long-term future, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.